Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webcast, Financial Services Under Attack, Modern Cyber Threats and Practical Ways to Protect Your Business. Our presenter for today is Ananth. He is the CEO and one of the original architects of Event Tracker SIM Solution. So let me go ahead and turn it on over to Ananth.
Thank you very much. Folks, good afternoon. Thank you. I understand that taking an hour out of your day is a lot to ask, and so appreciate very much your presence here. So let's talk a little bit about us. The Gartner Magic Quadrant for SIM just popped out, and for the 10th year in a row, we're on there. We've improved our position from last time. For those of you that are already customers, version 9 is expected before the year is out. And so Santa has been very kind to us all. We offer this solution as not just a product, but as a co-managed SIM. The challenge being to actually get the value out of a SIM installation. And so this makes it a practical and efficient solution for even those that have relatively, or I should say, especially for those that have limited security teams. But enough about this. Some background as to when we speak about attacks in the financial sector, what exactly is it that makes us capable of speaking? Why should you pay any attention at all to us? Aside of the aforementioned Gartner Magic Quadrant, the fact is that we eat our own dog food. That's me over there. And what I mean by that is we're actually using our own product in order to deliver a service. Consequently, we review approximately 9 billion logs every day across many customers around the globe. So we get to see these attacks up front because we're responsible for actually manning the console and alerting to our customers and escalating to them. So that's why maybe we have some reasonable basis for this conversation. Billions and billions of logs. I mentioned 8 billion. For those of you that are old enough, that's Carl Sagan. And we publish vignettes on what we've seen, snippets that are anonymized as catches of the day. You can find these on our website under catch of the day. So if you're interested, some stories that happen at all of our customers. So what sorts of attacks are we talking about from a financial services side? Well, first of all, there's plenty of evidence that attackers are smart enough to understand where the money is. And so they're attacking because financial services firms have interesting data. And so as a vertical, the financial services firms are much more attractive as targets compared to many other verticals. One common technique is, of course, phishing, because people have implemented, for the most part, so surely everyone on this call has, all of the basics, right? They've got a properly professionally configured firewall, they're up to date in their patching, they've done their antivirus. And so a full frontal assault on the gates of the castle is less likely to succeed. So a pernicious phishing attempt has become very popular. On average, you see 12 per day per person, right? But the sad part of it is the reason why they continue doing it is because a lot of us still open these fraudulent emails. 23%. Actually 11% clicking on the attachment. So when you get that notice that says you've been selected for jury duty and you need to show up, do you click a Microsoft Word document and enable macros? Well, apparently 11% of us actually do. When they say that your Amazon.com delivery has been delayed or your tax refund is in jeopardy, do you? Depends on the season, right? During the summer, it was one weird trick to melt body fat. Really click that stuff? Well, 50% of those who clicked did so quickly. So they're being very efficient in terms of, that inbox to zero, but they're doing it in the completely wrong way. So of course, this is going to stop when the morale improves, that kind of thing. What do attackers really do in order to try to get this hapless victim to actually open it? The reality is they often spoof a bank or a payment service. Why? Because the buyer is more likely to pay attention because their financial well-being is involved. There have been cases happened in Minnesota in the winter where the email actually showed up and it purported to be from HR, human resources, just before a snowstorm. And it said something like our snow policy. That can happen. That's very targeted. That was very timely. That was very focused. But generically, it comes to you from apparently Bank of America. But of course, it isn't anything of the sort. So 64% of the time. What it does is this weakens customer trust. So if you're a financial services firm and someone's using your name, your logo in order to send out this kind of bogus stuff, why then the buyer begins to wonder whether any mail or this brand in fact can be trusted. And so this is a terrible thing. I mean, after the incident at Target some years ago, I dare say we all hesitated to proffer our credit cards over at that store. Customer trust was inevitably weakened. The statistics say 42% less likely to engage afterwards. By the way, these surveys are all wonderful things. If you want details on where we found all of this info, happy to provide them. Ask away in the Q&A. And by the way, we talked about the Q&A as something that we want to do after the call is toward the end. No such thing. Happy to take your comments or your questions at any point during the broadcast. Use the functions of GoToMeeting. Happy to take them anytime. So the other technique, aside of phishing, is the so-called business email compromise. This is a popular technique. CEO purportedly sends a message to the CFO saying he needs to have some wire transferred. When can we do this? It typically lasts 2 or 3 exchanges, and there's an attempt to build some sort of trust. There's an attempt to spoof the CEO's address. Usually what happens is that the from address claims to be the CEO, but then the reply to in the email will actually go someplace else, in the hope that if you keep it short and you keep it in their style, someone will be prompted to actually respond. I mean, has it been successful? You tell me. $1.2 billion last year, right? And actually last year means 2016. So these are the sorts of things that financial services firms must be aware of. This is the state of the threat landscape. The other obvious elephant in the room that we've seen in the last 18, 24 months has been the growth of ransomware. Blistering pace. You hardly had 3, maybe 4 million in 2015, 638 million in 16, and the pace has been continually blistering in 17, right? And the sad news is when they got infected, the buyers, the attacked, the targets, lost data for 2 days. If you add up what the cost is of being out of business for 2 days, if you ignore the loss of customer trust, you ignore the penalties that might accrue, you ignore the lawsuits that might happen, the sensitive info that might have been leaked, and you simply focus on the operational costs of your organization being down for 2 days, that itself ought to be worrisome in the extreme. And so what are we saying? We're saying ransomware is being attempted once every 40 seconds. Staggeringly large number. This is the side effect of being always on. One click and you go to China, right? Well, one click and China's coming to us. Happening much more in the North American continent for a couple of reasons. One, most connected, right? Many other places not so connected. Living in a cave in Afghanistan, well, probably not likely that you have broadband internet, right? The second is this is the place that has the maximum stuff online. After all, Willie Sutton, when he was asked, why did you rob the bank? His answer was because that's where the money is. So because this is where the value is, that's why you see these attacks being much more predominant in the North American context. Damages are staggering, 5 billion in 2017 estimated. And this is a mix of multiple things. Believe me, the smallest one of these is actually the penalty that you will be faced with. The biggest one of it, the biggest piece of this is the operational cost to climb back onto the saddle, the fact that people might have to actually sit around for a day or two as you disinfect all of these systems, the expense of bringing in experts from the outside that will tell us how it occurred, what happened, what should we do next, and then of course the legal costs. right? Lawyers are expensive, particularly in this case. So these are all challenges that the financial services sector in particular faces with ransomware. So based on our experience in the last year, we're seeing a couple of different techniques that have become popular. By the way, what you can expect in this call is that we will describe broadly what are the threats and then what can you do about it. And as a hint, this is not a Chicken Little type presentation. The sky is not falling. You don't have to be running around saying all is woe and there's no point living anymore. Nothing like that. But then to be aware of the problem is to be able to actually do something about it. So we need to understand a little bit about what's going on, who's attacking, what their motivations are, and how they're attacking. All of that will inform us in terms of how to defend on a budget, how to defend practically, how to defend without having a sky is falling type mentality. So the first new trend that we saw in 2017 is an attempt at being much more evasive. The bad guys are assuming out of the box that you've got your defenses up, that you've established a brand name antivirus, and that you are looking at, for example, files, and you're thinking about whether those files actually are any good, yes or no. Why, in that case, the escalation is that the bad guys go fileless, right? So we saw things like Powerlix and CryptoLocker, which didn't use any files. In the case of Powerlix, it was based on the registry. You ran a macro, that macro stuck stuff in the registry, never touched the file system anyway. And so your favorite antivirus, as capable as it might be, wasn't necessarily able to catch it. The other interesting technique we saw with malware families like JAF was to say, we'll do this via DNS. After all, for you to function, you must have the ability to go to DNS. That's a channel by which the desktop, the server, whatever is going to resolve domain names. So that's traffic in and out of the network. It'll look innocuous. If I'm even sniffing traffic on the network, you probably won't think it's out of the ordinary. But if I can resolve a text record from a rogue DNS server out in China, why then that might be a way by which I can fetch ransomware down, not necessarily embedded as a file, because that's become like so 2016. And another attempt at evasion was to mutate, to be polymorphic. This is the whack-a-mole problem. You do all of your stuff and you catch it and you kill it. But what it really did was, before it ran, it had the assumption that it was going to be caught. And with that assumption, it actually cloned itself in other places in the machine, other places on the network. And it popped up and said, here I am. And you whacked at it because your defenses were up to snuff. Your antivirus was working, your event tracker Symphonic was there, and somebody alerted you, and you were prompt and responsive, and you whacked that mole, only to find out that it actually had mutated and went somewhere else again. So a technique that gained a lot of popularity in 2017 was evasion. And then there was the dependence on the external network. In years past, you could reliably sit at the edge of the network and watch north-south traffic. I mean, after all, every kind of malware had to phone home, had to communicate with a bot herder, had to communicate with a command and control system. Well, we saw the emergence of WannaCry, which later on got renamed by somebody as Netya, meaning it denied you access. Well, this thing never actually communicated to anything anywhere. It threw up its ransom message without actually having any external communications at all. Everything it needed was built into its guts. And so all of that network scanning stuff that you had in place, intrusion detection systems, etc., really didn't play much of a role because this thing never communicated, never put out any packets. What's there to see? Right? So you saw this as another variation in the 2017 timeframe. Another third technique we saw, which might be interesting to you guys, is the cyber bomb. What's this? Well, given the rash of theft that's occurring, What's happened is there's a glut of this kind of PII, or personally identifiable information, in the dark web. Used to be that when you stole a credit card and it was good, you could maybe get $50 for it. Now, given the number of credit cards that have been stolen, for instance, clean one might only be worth $1, which means that these bad guys, and make no mistake, these bad guys are capitalist pigs just like the rest of us. They're in it for the money. They steal something and its value has gone down. Now, being capitalist pigs, they want obviously to be rewarded for their effort. So just merely stealing PII has become less and less attractive, right? Even if they can do it on the cheap, the fact is the value of what they're stealing has come down because of a glut in the marketplace that's available. Such a lot of stuff's been stolen, right? So you see attempts at hostage taking. They say things like, nice business you have here. It would be a shame if something happened to it and you were out of business for a couple of days. We know that you probably clean 500 large every day, and 2 days would cost you a cool million. So how about a quarter of that, and we'll just simply walk away. Otherwise, the bomb's going to go off in 2 days, tick, 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 and there's no negotiation, no communication, no nothing else. You're not going to get another warning, right? This is a cyber bomb. This is somebody saying, look, for the effort that bad guy saying, for the effort that I take to create this piece of malware and actually get it in past all of your defenses, I'm not happy with just stealing credit cards, because that's not really worth a whole heck of a lot. This is theft in that scale. The nation state equivalent of this was Petya. This is, according to the people that know, this is the Russians against the Ukrainians, right? We're going to disable all your power infrastructure. I mean, these are all stuff that happens interconnected because the bad guys are collaborating. There's a marketplace where you can actually buy such sort of weapons, and they get weaponized and then they get used in commercial ways. So these are some of the trends that you saw in 2017. And so the question for you ought to be, hey, how are you placed if any of these come your way? Right? That's something to think about. So let me give you an example. This is something that we saw at one of our customers, an attempt at phishing, and this was a fileless attack. The company is Contoso. It's a well-known fake company, and they had a posting on their website, and they were advertising the positions that were open, and they encouraged qualified candidates to apply. And of course, they have an HR department that tends to be very good at recruitment, but not necessarily IT experts, right? So there's this guy that had the address of whatever, applied for a position via the website. And the subject line was resume for job position. And the attachment was latest_resume.doc. Relatively innocuous, right? I mean, after all, that's the whole point of having these job postings. Well, the HR lady receives the email, and because it's her job function, opens actually the attachment because she's supposed to actually look for these kinds of resumes. What pops up? This kind of message. Now notice the social engineering here. This thing purports to be from McAfee. It has the word secure in big capital letters. And then it states, completely bogus, of course, this document has been secured by McAfee. To view this protected document, click enable content. Sneaky trick to get Jennifer to enable macros, which now in Word are disabled by default, right? Now, poor Jennifer, not being an IT expert, probably thought in this instance that this is a candidate that's with it. He's understood that these kinds of things happen because she's vaguely aware that cyber threats occur, even down in HR. They know about this. And so she's saying to herself, yeah, well, this guy is with it, man. I mean, he's encrypted. He doesn't want just any old person to be able to open his resume. And so she falls for the gag, right? What that does is it runs a macro, which by default are disabled in Microsoft Word, now get enabled because that's what enabled content really means. Well, this macro launches PowerShell, right? PowerShell is now built in to every endpoint that you have. incredibly powerful piece of technology with all kinds of wild power, right? And what this PowerShell did in this instance was it launched a DNS query. And the DNS query was launched to a relatively unknown, hardly ever used, never used by Contoso domain called .pw. Right? Now, DNS is something that's certainly allowed. Otherwise, Jennifer's desktop won't work at all. Right? But who's really looking at DNS traffic in and out of the network? In this instance, it fetched a text record. Usually, DNS is an A record which translates a name to an IP address. But it also has the capability of downloading text records where you can get relatively larger amounts of info. Right? DNS wasn't designed to transfer like FTP, big old things. But between an A record and a text record, you can do a lot more transfer in a text record. Well, that text record contained still more PowerShell. One of the first things we saw that it did was created a scheduled task. What's the point here? Well, it was trying to be persistent. It figured that at some point, Jennifer would maybe catch on to this, or call somebody in IT who'd catch on to this, or Jennifer maybe would log off, or maybe Jennifer would power cycle the machine. And they didn't want to let their foothold go. By creating a scheduled task, they were able to persist across reboots. So could you have caught this? Sure. If you happen to, for instance, be looking for PowerShell and saying to yourself, why is PowerShell running on an HR person's laptop, desktop? Should never be running there, right? If you were paying attention to the DNS queries and you were saying, hey, why is somebody fetching a text record from PW domain? If you were paying attention at the hundreds and maybe even thousands of endpoints, desktops, laptops, why is there a scheduled task being created? What are the odds that the defense mechanisms you currently have in place are actually going to catch these clues? The answer is it's unlikely. Right? You have to be really extra vigilant in order to catch this. Now, by the way, why wouldn't antivirus help me? And the answer is it might. These things don't have a guarantee of infection. I mean, most of the time, they in fact actually fail. Right? The other point that's worth mentioning is, what does win or lose really mean? There is a popular demoralizing statement made towards defenders such as you and me that says, we the defenders have to win each and every time against each and every attack and at each and every endpoint everywhere in the network forever and forever. Whereas the attacker, well, the attacker gets infinite number of tries. There's no penalty for trying, and has to really win only once. And if they do, they win, we lose. Now, if you buy this paradigm, then why would you want to be in the defense business? The deck is completely stacked against you, right? Over some time T, there's probably no chance that you can win. Why? Because to win means you have to win each and every single time, right? That argument is in fact false. The fact of the matter is, they only win if all stages of the attack succeed. If anywhere along the line, either a vigilant human or a network defense or some software like an antivirus is able to catch them and stop them before they're able to exfiltrate the data, anywhere along that kill chain, why then the defender actually won and the attacker lost. So something that you don't see a lot of is attackers actually fail far more often than they succeed. And that's okay. That's as it should be. They don't necessarily take that type of rejection to heart. They just keep trying, and they keep trying at scale, and they keep trying with automation, which says that we should really be doing the same thing on the defense side as well. So what we speak of, though, is what's called detection deficit, right? I mean, the fact is that the network, particularly in a financial services firm, is under assault. And being under assault 24/7, the fact of the matter is you have to have a paradigm called assume breach. At some point, for some reason, something's going to get through. And when it does get through, now it's on the inside of the network. And all your perimeter defenses that are there to prevent it from getting through have somehow been overcome. Now the game shifts. The question is, how quickly can you find it once it's actually taken root inside your network? Catching that, detecting that is the challenge. That's called the deficit of detection. Once it's in because it got past your antivirus, because it got past your firewall, because it got past your perimeter. Does that mean there's no way to find it? Well, there are many classic techniques, and of course you should implement them, but you should also be alive to the fact that they aren't necessarily perfect. Right? For instance, there's next generation firewalls that the vendor has sold you, no doubt, telling you that it's super effective, and it is, but it isn't perfect. There's antivirus, there is signature based for the most part. There's endpoint threat detection systems that have shown up and say, well, whatever it is that antivirus missed, I'm actually going to catch that. That's something that Event Tracker does. And so you can look for a out of ordinary. I wonder why John has been logging in to the Active Directory machine when in fact he's an HVAC technician who should never really have had access to this in the first place. By the way, that's precisely what happened down at Target. They targeted an HVAC vendor and then used the vendor's credentials to actually log into the data center, which shouldn't have been allowed, and then to the endpoints in the Target stores, which shouldn't have been allowed either. So out of the ordinary is something that worth looking at. Of course, you got to do it at scale, got to do it in a timely fashion, but that is a technique. And then the first time seen, we've never seen this EXE uniquely identified perhaps by the MD5 hash. What's it doing? Has it been signed? Why is it running on this? Is it good because it's a new maybe update that showed up from Microsoft and therefore it's going to run now for a long time? Or is this a never ever seen kind of deal? So these are ways of combating detection deficit. Once they actually run, instead of assuming that if it got past the AV and is running on an endpoint, therefore it must be good because my perimeter defenses are perfect. Doesn't work. Yet another technique that works especially effectively, is to flip the antivirus model around on its head and say, those things constantly scrutinized based on signature, things that are occurring that we don't think should run, so-called unsafe list, sometimes called a blacklist. How about you flip that model around and instead think of a safe list, sometimes called a whitelist? Harder to do, difficult to manage, but incredibly effective, and much more important, it's resource limited, meaning it will not eat you out of CPU memory and RAM, which antivirus has a tendency to. The problem with this approach, really, really difficult to implement, particularly if you have a dynamic environment. This works especially well if you have a constrained environment, right? So if any of you are coming from, say, for instance, retail, and you're running point of sale systems, why then those point of sale systems ought not to be changing all day and all night like a desktop for a knowledge worker probably is, which means this approach lends itself well to certain segments of the network. For instance, ought you be safe list based on your domain controller? Probably yes. Why? Well, because that's a controlled machine. It doesn't change itself all day long. It should be relatively static. Any changes you make to it ought to be maybe thought through, approved with change requests and so on. On the other hand, should you do this at a knowledge worker's desktop? The answer is probably no. Should you do that across the board at all of your workers, your employees? The answer is probably no. So such techniques are useful. What you should be mindful of is where they apply, where do they make sense? No such thing as a silver bullet that'll catch everything. Now, the safe list, there are many starting points. You could start from the National Software Reference Library. This is a gigantic DB maintained with your tax dollars. And you could enhance that locally. Non-American vendors typically don't participate. So if you're buying equipment from non-American vendors, you might feel like you want to enhance this. We had a customer that is fond of using equipment from Siemens in Germany. That those people don't participate in this safe list, and so we had to enhance it for them. We talked about the whack-a-mole. Dormant malware is another challenge, right? Stuff gets on your machine, doesn't really run. Doesn't run for a day, a week. What's up with that? Right? If you're able to catch that kind of stuff, because otherwise, you know, our antivirus engines are focused like a laser on stuff that does run. What if it doesn't? What if it just sits there like a dummy for 3 weeks? Isn't that something you'd like to catch? So by the way, there's antivirus, and then there is anti-malware. Anti-malware will come around periodically and scan all of the EXEs, including the ones that aren't running, for evidence. So anti-malware has a shot of catching dormant malware as well. Threat intel integration. Bad guys are collaborating. Good guys should collaborate too. It's called threat intel. Available from a wide variety of people, depending upon your sector. You know, and are you in financial services? In which case, the FS Isaac is the one that does this type of coordination for you. There's public-private partnerships like the FBI's InfraGard, where the government tells you what is it that they're saying and wants you to be mindful. There are vertical industry associations. There are those that are focused on technology. If you're doing Microsoft, if you're doing Cisco, then those kinds of things. There are geographically based. I mean, if you're in Kazakhstan, it's one set of problems. If you're in the Gaza Strip, another set. If you're in Oskaloosa, Iowa, maybe not so concerned about Ivan the Terrible running on the rampage out there. So they could be geographic. So integrating these threat intelligence feeds into your solution is useful. We talked about DNS. It's a increasingly popular way because there isn't enough sunshine on DNS traffic. So watching DNS would be a good thing as well. So this number is down. It's now 98 days between a threat actually making its way into the network and being outed. Right? The good news is this used to be nearly 230 days. You're down by half to maybe 100 days. But it's still so long that if damage is going to occur, it's going to be really a bad thing. You're thinking cybersecurity, are you? Well, in that case, there is no one place to think about it, right? You got to prevent. Yes, you got to have firewalls. You've got to have something that blocks all of these things. But then you should also be able to detect. As the saying goes, perfect protection is not practical. And so also monitoring is necessary, right? And this attack frequency growing and the sophistication growing, it says that detection while the attack is going on is also a equally important thing. And that's the place where we have extraordinary faith in our preventative abilities and therefore don't really pay attention to the detection or the monitoring part. That's something to especially pay attention to. So, and the last part is respond, investigate, that if you see something, don't just say something, do something. So a place where often, if you solve the first two problems, you should focus on the response and the investigation, right? If someone asks you, what are the top 3 or 5, or tell me about the last 6 months, what sorts of incidents have you had? You ought to be able to say, you know, on Jan 6th, we had this is what happened. This is what we've improved. This is why it won't happen again. On February the 3rd, this happened, and so on. If you can do that, then you're really way ahead of the curve in terms of sophistication in defense. Now, is all that a product by itself? The answer is probably not. Is all that a service? The answer is yes, but it probably uses a product at the back, because obviously doing this manually is a non-starter. So if you want to succeed, you should think not just about product, but also about services, whether you provide them or somebody else provides them. By the way, did I mention that we're happy to take questions? So if you guys have any or comments, please feel free to offer them via the GoToWebinar session. So side by side, the other side of the cybersecurity coin is the regulatory compliance coin. The compliance coin has come about in an attempt to make us secure. Chicken and egg, what comes first? Chicken or egg? Security or compliance? In our view, security comes first, compliance is the outgrowth. So we assume that you have already mitigated risk to an extent as shown in this diagram, right? Meaning that you've been diligent. You're running a company network. You have up-to-date antivirus and its brand name. You're patching on a regular basis. You've got proper next generation firewall. You've configured them appropriately. You've got authentication, something like maybe Active Directory down. Great, nice. This is the proverbial 2-foot wall. But you could also think about log management where you centralize it all, particularly if you're interested in the compliance aspect. This is something that the bare minimum that the auditor is expecting from you. And then things like vulnerability assessment, file integrity monitoring, again, usually called out in any compliance standard. Pick one and they've got all of these called out. At this point, you've become hardened. By the way, our mission, we want to be a hard target. Our attacker is going to stop attacking, or as you know who said, haters going to hate, hate, hate. So what are you going to do? You have to just be a hard enough target to where they move on to the next guy. If you did that, then your work here is done. You're not going to cure them and make them good. That's their mother's job. Your job is to be a hard target such that they move on to attack somebody else, because that's what they do. They're attackers. Take this one step ahead, advanced. You could do security incidents, notifications, you could do response. The SANS Institute has guidance on this. You could do endpoint threat detection because antivirus is like so 2016 with maybe auto response. If you see something you don't like, you're going to kill it. Look for new, first time seen, or processes that we don't recognize at all because they're not on any safe list that we had. Activity that's occurring on the network, like that DNS traffic that is suspicious. And then, of course, other kinds of things. So all of this is technology. Above that is the services that are necessary for success, right? Technology by itself doesn't really do a whole heck of a lot. It's the people behind the technology that will actually give you that benefit, whether you're doing it or someone else is doing it. This picture that I'm speaking about here on this diagram is the second half. So detecting it is nice, but having detected it, what? So how do you detect, by the way? You look for data inside your network. That's on the left side of the screen. And then you compare it against either what you know to be odd. Gee, I wonder why Susan is logging into the SQL server when she really is the front desk receptionist, right? Shouldn't be, not part of a job function. What's that about? Or it's because you got threat intel. You're a member of the FS Isaac, and FS Isaac told you that this particular attack is currently underway against financial institutions. So you have that knowledge. Be aware, be alert. Now you see that type of signature, that type of trail, that type of indication inside your network. Why then it's time to wake up and pay attention. So that's the left side of the screen. The compare says you're looking at what's going on versus what you know to be unreasonable, out of ordinary, strange, threatening behavior, and you're raising an alert. Well, nice, great, wonderful. But does it guarantee you that that alert was meaningful? There's a step of validation. Hey, is this thing really right? Or is it just a false alarm? If it is, then you've got that tune arrow at the top. And it's the important, critically important feedback loop that says, yeah, you said it to me, but I'm telling you it's not a problem. It's our internal vulnerability scanner. It runs the third Thursday of every month at 4:45 in the afternoon from this machine with this account. Stop getting excited. It's not worth getting excited, right? That kind of stuff is very, very key. Now, all of this that I'm describing lends itself to automation. That's good because you can do it at scale. You can do it tirelessly. You can do it all day, all night, right? After that, on the right, the stuff that's in blue tends to be a little bit harder. If you did in fact validate, yes, this is an alert, that's meaningful. I got to go investigate now. I mean, still could turn out to be nothing, in which case you go back. But if it did turn out to be something, why then you have to remediate, fix it, which will allow you to contain it. You should also now be thinking about documenting it. 3 months from now, when someone shows up and says, hey, Johnny, what were the sorts of incidents we had? You ought not to be saying, let me remember. I remember the time, when Susan had the thing on the guy and the thing. That is not a recipe for sustained success. So that documentation piece is something that is worth paying attention to as well. All right. So what are the tools to improve threat detection? You're in financial services. You're being attacked 300% more than anyone else. You're receiving spam email. They're trying to weaken your trust. You've got all of your basic weaponry in place, your antivirus, your authentication. What else should you be thinking about from a practical standpoint? Well, here are some things, and surprise, surprise, these are things that Event Tracker does. SIM and centralized log management so that you can look at it in one place. Threat intelligence integration, because it's not just what you know, it's what the wisdom of the crowd, so-called crowdsourcing, knows. Integrating that threat intel. Another interesting technique that we've observed that is very effective is deception. And you know that the bad guys are going to show up. How about deception technology? It's also sometimes called honeypots or honey nets. Honey nets are a group of honeypots. If you can hide them in plain sight, why then anybody that touches a honeypot, regardless of how pure they may appear to be, are revealed by their activity. It's not what someone says you are, it's what you do. So your actions define you, not somebody else's words about you, right? If that strikes a chord, why then deception is something that you should pay attention to. Of course, checking on dormant malware because of this whack-a-mole problem, and then monitoring endpoints, right? We talked about that in the previous slides. The theme of RSA last year, and it's coming up again soon, was that the battleground has shifted from servers to the endpoints. Why is that, by the way? A couple of reasons. Reason number one is there are many more endpoints than there are servers, right? I mean, what's your ratio like? What, 10 to 1, 15 to 1 of endpoints to servers? You got 15 of those to one server, right? So there's more of those. So the landscape, the threat surface available for attack is much bigger. That's one. The second is that the people that are sitting at these endpoints are much less likely to be IT security types. Therefore, they may be more susceptible to attacks. So for those two reasons, remember, bad guys are capitalists, right? Whatever is the easiest way for them to get in and then spread laterally is their way. A frontal assault on the servers, less likely to work. Why? Heavily fortified, scrutinized and monitored by IT security types, therefore less chances of getting in. On the other hand, some endpoint somewhere, maybe not really even being monitored, maybe not even kept up to date, and perhaps the person in front of it isn't IT specialist, security specialist. Therefore, higher chance that you'll actually be able to get in. And so that's what endpoint monitoring is for. Aside of that, you are doing vulnerability, one hopes. If you're subject to compliance, then you should be. You need to know what your weak spots are so that you can actually fortify them and watch for attacks on them. That includes both on the network as well as on the endpoint, and looking at stuff that's going north-south. Very often, one of these techniques will help you. I'm sometimes asked by people that, hey, the problem seems very deep in scope. Give me the Cliff Notes version. If I needed to be safe, what are some 3 or 4 things that I should do in order to safeguard? Where do I start? Because it seems like there's no end to this. I could keep on doing this forever and I'm still not, secure. What are the basics? Tell me the basics. Our point to those folk is look for 4 things. A, look at Active Directory if you have it, because that's where all of the users, their passwords, and any activity that's going on by administrators is occurring. Pay attention to this. That's the keys to the kingdom, right? That's one. The second is look at your external facing firewall, right? There's a lot of door knocking that happens. What's going on? Who's knocking on your door? Are they getting in? If they're getting in, what endpoints are they talking to, right? So the external facing firewall is the second place to look. The third is to look at the wire itself. This is the intrusion detection. Once it got past the firewall, who's talking to who? What are they saying? Does it match any signature kind of stuff? And then last but not the least, talk to me at your endpoints. What are your endpoints doing? What's going on with them? How many of them are unknown? What's out of ordinary and new behavior? You do these 4, why you've covered 80% of your network. You know what's going on in AD, you know what's going on the wire, you know what's going on the endpoints. You've got 85%, 80% of your network covered. The rest of it, that's nice to have, but this is the basics. And remember the old 80-20 rule? You want to spend 20% effort and get 80% coverage. You could do something like this with this technology that I have in front of you, and you'd have satisfied yourself quite a bit. So we're talking about long-term success, right? Short-term success, you could do that with heroics, right? You stayed late, you happened to see something, you noticed that it didn't make a whole lot of sense, you pulled on that thread, and then you were super efficient in trying to run it down. That's good. But that is not a recipe for long-term success, right? For long-term success, you need three things. That's why we call it a triad, right? You need technology for sure. And we've talked about some of that technology in the previous slide. You need SIM, you need endpoint detection and response, you need vulnerability, you need intrusion detection. But that's really 1/3 or even maybe 20% of the real problem. The rest of this problem for long-term success is under the waterline. That's that dashed line that you see. You need both expertise. What does this mean? What does it mean to me now? And this threat landscape is forever changing. And you also need discipline, process discipline. When you can do this, you've got yourself long-term success. So there's pieces of this that can be offered to you from the outside with a solution like Symphonic, which is our service based on our product, but that still leaves you with things to do on your side. Most notably, executive sponsorship. Somebody on your side who has budget authority must agree that this is a problem, must agree that they're willing to unshackle some IT budget to do this. Sometimes that gets done because of regulatory compliance. There's the fear of an audit, or there's the hall of shame where your name will be or your reputation will be down, that frees that budget. Sometimes it's forward thinking. Whatever it is, it needs to be there. Absent that, this technology, this discussion, this chat is going nowhere. Right? You can't cure a patient when they deny that there is even a problem. Right? So that's executive sponsorship. Beyond that, while some things can be done by an organization on the outside like us, there are other things that are best done by the organization themselves, and that is remediation. You all know your network especially well. While we, folks like us, specialize in knowing threats and recognizing them for what they are and implementing and tuning SIMs, we don't know your network as well as you do in terms of what makes sense, what doesn't. And so that's the other thing that's in red, which is response. So you want to be long-term successful, you have to do all of these things on a sustained basis. But the point is, you can have somebody else do a lot of this, limiting yourself to do the stuff that really you should do. This makes it much more likely that you'll get the process discipline and you'll have the expertise as it's necessary to actually make this work. With that, I have time for questions. So David, I'm happy to take any questions that the audience might have.
Great. We have a few questions here for you, so I will get started with this. What do you think will be the next evolution of ransomware that we should be prepared for?
So we discussed some of those, right? We saw that there is well, first of all, there'll be much better evasion, right? Ransomware is not a problem that's going to go away. And the reason it's not going away is because it's incredibly effective and it's generating revenue for these bad guys. So you'll see greater amounts of evasion. You'll see things like fileless, like you saw. You'll see stealthiness that gets past the defenses. There was one we saw the other day where the attacker was watching VirusTotal. And when they discovered that the MD5 hash, the SHA-1 hash of the ransomware that they had released had been uploaded to VirusTotal, they realized right away that they had been caught. And they released a second version, which had a completely different SHA-1 checksum. Right? So when they see that you've called the cops or you've done something that indicates that you're aware of them, why then they change their technique and blend in? It's another way of being persistent. the evolution of ransomware will also be in the fact that understand that these bad guys are interested in money. And so what is it that's going to work for them in terms um, of getting them revenue? So two trends. One is you see very targeted attacks. There was this USB stick that made its rounds at one of the film industry's bashes that purported to be the trailer of a hot new show, and was given to people that attended saying, you got to see this. And so when they went back to their offices and they actually plugged that in, it wasn't anything of the sort, right? It was a socially engineered technique to get past your defenses and get inside the network, right? So these sorts of things is what you can expect going forward. The other thing is very determined attacks so there's the garden variety, high volume, high velocity stuff, and 85, 90, 95% of it is going to be that way. And if you've done best practices and you've been sensible and lived a good life, why then you'll be fine. And then there's the very persistent, very determined, very targeted attacks that are going to happen. And that's a whole other kettle of fish. David?
Yes. So next question is about the event tracker solution. Asking, is this a software-only solution or is there hardware to buy?
Event tracker is software only. There is no hardware to buy. It's available in a couple of versions. In one version, it lives, all of it lives inside your firewall. And in another version, the sensors live on your endpoints, but the data then gets transferred to a hosted instance that's sitting at our colo. But in both cases, it's a software-only solution. You can run this on existing hardware, and of course, it can be virtualized.
Okay. And then another question about the event tracker. How often do you update the threat intelligence behind the event tracker platform?
Oh, several times a day. We're not, I mean, you understand, we are not originators, at least usually not originators of threat intel. We're consumers of it. I mean, in the same way as in the world, the NSA is the one that gathers intelligence. It's the police people that actually put it to use. In similar fashion, we are consumers. Now, we are also observers. And so in Event Tracker, there is the option to publish threats that you've seen, and surely our SOC shares among customers our experiences. But by and large, we're using feeds, and these feeds from the reputable vendors are often updated several times a day.
That's excellent. All right, that's all the questions we have for now. So thank you once again to everybody for attending. Thank you once again to Anant, and I hope everybody has a great day.